Debate. The Honourable Member for Brampton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to address this House today in support of Bill C7, tabled this last January by my colleague, the Minister of Employment, Work Development and Labour. As you know, improving labour relations is one of our government priorities. I therefore urge all honourable members to support this bill. The purpose of Bill C4 is to amend the Canada Labour Code, the Parliamentary Employment and Staff Relation Act, the Public Service Relation Act, the Income Tax Act by repealing the provisions enacted by Bill C37 and C525. These bills force unions to produce useless financial statements and make it harder for Canadians in federally regulated workplaces to unionize. Basically, Mr. Speaker, it's a matter of justice and fairness for the workers affected. You know as well as I do that good labour relations are essential, ensuring Canada's economic growth and prosperity. Labour relation legislation ensures some balances between the employees and unions. Our government understands that. When the previous government supported the bill C377 and C525, we opposed them and tried to make the government understand that these legislative measures were unjust and unfair. But our efforts were in vain. The previous government refused to listen to reasons and chose to move ahead even if it meant jeopardizing the fragile balance that had been achieved in employers-employees relationship. And we were not the only one to raise red flags about those bills. Mr. Speaker, Bill C4 is the right thing to do. The purpose of Bill C4 is essentially to remedy this by restoring justice and fairness to Canadian labour relations. Many stakeholders expressed their concerns. Overwhelming evidence have been heard on Bill C4. Public Service Alliance of Canada supported Bill C4, saying that Bills C377 and C525 are flawed and are introduced without proper consultation and are detrimental to the workers' right. Further, Bill C4 is hailed by Canadian Labour Congress, President Hassan Youssef and Provincial Building and Construction Trade Council of Ontario for restoring the labour relation of Canada. Bill C377 would force the union and the Labour Trust to declare their expenses, assets, debts and the salaries of certain individuals. That information would then be made publicly available to the Canada Revenue Agency's website. They would also have to provide details on the time spent on the political and lobbying activities, as well as any activities not directly related to the labour relation. Thankfully, the Minister of National Revenue has already taken steps to lift these obligations while Parliament examines the Bill C4. We have to understand that if this information was made public, these measures would put the unions at huge disadvantage to the employers. Bill C377 unfortunately upset the balance that had existed. And yet, Mr. Speaker, provisions were already in place to ensure that unions met their financial responsibilities. Section 110 of the Canada Labour Code and many provincial labour relation laws already requires union and employers to provide financial statements. Not to mention Bill C525, which would also create a major advantage for the management only. Bill C525 amended the Canada Labour Code, the Parliamentary Employment and Staff Relation Act, and the Parliament Public Service Labour Relation Act to change the union certification system. The traditional card verification system was replaced by mandatory voting system. Unions are no longer certified automatically, even if the majority of workers signed a membership card. The rule in existence was clear and well understood. The private sector workers with federally regulated employees could obtain union certification by signing a union membership card. For example, under the Canada Labour Code, the majority of the employees' signatures were recorded on the union membership card. Those cards were sent to the Canada Industrial Relationship Board to obtain the certification. Even if 35% of the workers were in favor of the unionization, a formal vote was taken. But unions now have to obtain support from 40% of workers before mandatory secret vote can be held. This system had a proven track record. However, the previous government chose to change things into purely ideological reasons. Mr. Speaker, this double standard is grossly unfair because it makes unionization much more difficult. We recognize the essential role of the unions play in protecting the rights of the workers and helping the middle class grow and prosper. The prosperity of the middle class and the Canadian economy depends upon harmonious and balanced labour relations. Bill C-4 has been tabled to reduce the imbalances in labour relations created by the previous government. I sincerely hope that the other members, honourable members, will see the benefit of Bill C-4, which re-establishes the balances between the rights and responsibilities of the employers and those of the employees. We have the duty to intervene, and we are proud to do so today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire? La députée d'Hochelaga.
The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal government says that it wants to improve workers' rights and to respect unions. And they talk about listening to the unions. Now, earlier I talked about anti-SCAP legislation. What I heard as an answer from my colleague was, well, there's no provincial anti-SCAP legislation. There must be a reason for that. Well, there is one in the Quebec Labour Code. There's anti-SCAP legislation. It's been in existence for 40 years and it works well. On Wednesday, there is a vote here in the Chamber on a bill in the name of the member for Jonquière, and it deals with anti-strike breaker legislation, and that would be an improvement to the working conditions for Canadians, and that would involve respecting unions. So, in the spirit of respecting Canadian workers and unions, will my colleague opposite tell me, does he intend to vote in favour of my colleague's bill on Wednesday?
The Honourable Member for Brampton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and thank you, Honourable Member, for asking the question. We recognize the major role being played by the unions in our economy and helping the middle class to prosper. The prosperity of the middle class and the Canadian economy depends upon the harmonious balance of the relationship. But the Bill 377 and Bill C-525, they created imbalances between the relationship between the unions, employers and employees, which will be set aside, which will be corrected by the Bill C-4. That's why we suggest the Bill 4 is the only bill which can remedy these all problems which were created by Bill 377 and Bill C-525. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question and commentaire. The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Does the Liberal government support the RAND formula?
Honourable member for Brampton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the bill which are already in existence, they have given such a system, created a system which has created the imbalances between the total labor relationships and has not given the solved any purpose which will create a better unionization. There was no possibility of getting the unions unionized properly. So we liberal, at this time we think that C4 will bring those changes and improve the relationship between unions and the employers.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate the presentation by my colleague on this particular thing. We saw where the RAND formula got Tim Hudak last time around. Mr. Speaker, people would know. People that follow the labour movement in this country and issues in this country around labour, they would know that Andrew Sims, probably the foremost authority on labour relations in this country, he had said, the member from Hochelaga talked about the anti-scab legislation. He had said during the last review of the Canada Labour Code that there was one issue that employers and employees could not agree on, and that was back to work legislation. And that the way the current system works is fine. It's the best. It's not perfect, but it's the best can be. But one thing that came out loud and clear through the hearings with 377 and 525, and Hassan Youssef and Jerry Dias and Fedco, all those that gave presentations from the labour movement, from labour relations across the country, they said it should be done in a tripartite manner with employers, employees, and government, not by single one-off private members' legislation. That there was a consistency in that testimony, Mr. Speaker. Does my colleague believe that is one of the main reasons for repealing these two bad bills? There were bills that there was no need for them. They were a solution in search of a problem. Does he agree that that's part of the reason why these bills should be repealed?
The Honourable member for Brampton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for honourable member. The bill which which is brought by 377 and Bill C525, they have restricted the totally unions from working and union relationship between the labour unions and the employers. And that relationship, till the time the relationship between the unions and the employers are not solid and they are not for the benefit of the workers, they are not going to be working properly. So that's why the relationship is the main thing which we feel that which should be restored, that balance between the unions, employers and the employees must be restored, and that Bill C4 will do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Well, notwithstanding the diatribe from the parliamentary secretary, I want to ask the honourable member who actually gave the speech, did he ever actually have one single constituent come to him during the last election campaign and say, I do not want the right to vote and I do not want to have any transparency about any financial information ever?
The Honourable member for Brampton Centre.
Thank you, member opposition, the other side. It's not only one time, many times it has happened during my election campaign. This question of the election, the card system which was already in existence from the long time, there was no flaw in that. It was the proper system which was working. The new system where you want to have the 40% of the members and then you want to have the secret ballot vote is giving more power to few persons, those who can create influence onto the unions and make the unions disintegrate, split the unions. And that will create chaos in the total system set of imbalances. That imbalances is to be removed by the Bill C4. Thank you, Mr.
Questions and comments? The Honourable member for Carleton was up. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I asked earlier if the honourable member supported the RAND formula, and he did not answer clearly, so I'll give him another opportunity. The RAND formula is the entire basis for the exclusive majority representation model of bargaining in a workplace that we have in all 10 Canadian provinces and in the federal jurisdiction. I just want to confirm that, in fact, his government does support the RAND formula.
Well, member for Brampton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, member, for the question. The actual process which was already in existence with the with labor relationship was to maintain the better unions and give prosperity to the Canadian prosperity into the Canadian middle classes. But when this total system is disturbed by creating new laws which are not required, unnecessarily they are. They were not. This was totally both the bills are creating total imbalance into the labor relationship. They are not required. They are unnecessarily paperwork and load onto the financial statements which are required to be given by the union. Whereas that system already exists under 10 of the Labour Code. Canada Labour Code already says that unions has to provide the financial statements. Provincially laws are there, and union itself, they have got their own constitution to provide the financial statements. So these laws were unnecessary, and Bill C4 is the only bill which can make the changes to set right and bring the balances between the relationship.
One final question, time for one final question. The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his speech and his comments. And I guess I just want to underline what we've heard from the other side was a need to bring more balance and fairness to the relationship between unionized employees and their employer. And I think one thing we need to point out is that the Canada Labour Code review is best done by a tripartite, but that process isn't always going to be able to arrive at a consensus, which is exactly what happened last time we reviewed replacement workers or anti-scab legislation. Would my colleague agree with me that sometimes it's important for the government to lead when one process isn't able to come to consensus? Although there's evidence for both sides, isn't there sometimes that government needs to lead a process? And would he agree with me that this might be the place to do it around anti-scab legislation? Thank you very much.
Honourable member for Brampton Centre.
Thank you, member, for the question. Intervention by the government is not the remedy for a better solution. The better solution is independent unions and independent employees and employer relationship, and that can only bring the better results on the bargaining table whenever it needs to be done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Avant que